Hello, thank you for joining us for the Shorts Shortlist program. My name is Opal Hope Bennett, the Shorts Programmer and Director of Filmmaker Development at Doc NYC. And it's my pleasure to welcome the filmmakers of the films in this program. I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you. They are a part of a list of 12 films that we've selected as amongst the best in short form documentary this year. This is our second year running, and these are the films that we think are likely to be in the conversation come awards time, and a couple of films that we want to add to the conversation. So let's get started. Please introduce yourselves. We'll start with Mike.
My name is Mike Attie, and I'm one of the directors of Abortion Helpline. This is Lisa.
And then Taylor.
Hi, my name is Taylor, and I'm one of the directors of Ashes to Ashes.
Alison.
Hi, I'm the director and producer of Flower Punk.
And Carol.
My name is Carol Nguyen. I'm the director and producer of No Crying at the Dinner Table.
Wonderful. Thank you guys all for joining us. And I gave you kudos offline, but I want to give it to you again. These is some brilliant work. And I'm really impressed with what you were able to share with us this year. Can I have each of you go around in the same order and tell us what your film, how you came about your film subject? Mike?
Oh, that was first night. So this, it's an interesting story in that I made this film with my mother, who is who is a filmmaker as well. And she started filmmaking when I was very young, and she's worked with a woman named Janet Goldwater for some time. They made a film probably when I was about 10 years old called Motherless, about women who had, people who had lost their mothers to illegal abortion. And they had this, and they've since made numerous films about reproductive rights. And they had thought some time ago that maybe like their filmmaking careers, at least as it relates to reproductive rights, that was not something they were going to do anymore. And lo and behold, Trump was elected and things felt like the conversation was being reset. They had Janet in particular had a relationship with this organization, Women's Medical Fund, which basically, there's a hotline in which an operator answers the phone to provide assistance for people who need money for abortions who are unable to get it because of something called the Hyde Amendment, which eliminates federal funding for abortion. And so they just felt like that would be a really interesting place to explore this issue of abortion access in a really kind of like small contained environment.
Thank you. And Taylor?
Yeah, this story really began with Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but is the producer of the film and my next door neighbor growing up in Massachusetts. So about 4 years ago, she was hosting a neighborhood dinner party to kind of garner some support for a funeral that she was putting on for the men, women, and children who were lynched in the Jim Crow era, and was looking for someone to kind of help document that event just for posterity. And knew that I was a filmmaker and approached me about it. And we decided to kind of take that journey together, which has been not only a journey of also connecting with Winfred Rembrandt, who is a survivor of an attempted lynching, but also a journey for me in understanding allyship and kind of collaborative filmmaking in this space. So yeah, Shirley put on this this funeral, and we documented that, and then a friendship really started developing between her and Winfred, and so we spent more time with him. And then together kind of just put together the story that's really addressing, addressing racial trauma and what role art plays in that. So that's kind of how it got started.
Thank you. Alison?
I mean, if you see an image of Azuma's artwork, with flowers, you see that bouquet in space or at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, how can you not immediately be intrigued? my friend Mark Silver, who's an incredible director as well as cinematographer of Flower Punk. I was living in Japan, and he kind of shared his appreciation of Azuma's work and some of his writings, which showed me that there was a lot more behind, you know, the work of this artist. Really, so many things about beauty and decay and life and death, and you know, the works kind of spoke for themselves, but it was clear that there was a bigger story to be told about the artist and the inspiration and the process. And after having done films about Ai Weiwei and Carmen Herrera, you know, I was really excited. It took several years to make this film. I think I first met Azuma, you know, in 2014. It took a few years to kind of put together the funding and kind of get it right in front of the line for what I was doing at the time and what Mark's availability. So it ended up being shot in 2018 on a month-long break while I was filming The Brink and following Steve Bannon for 13 months between him leaving the White House and the midterm elections. So I feel like the films, you know, everything about the pacing, the contemplativeness, the idea of looking at something, even as someone who believes everything is political, getting a chance to kind of stop and smell the roses, you know, to kind of go and look at flowers and think about beauty, think about life and death, was actually like a very welcome break from the work I had been doing at the time. And it's just so great to be able to put it out in the world. And thanks to Doc NYC, I just wanted to say, because we had our premiere with you guys a year ago.
Full
And
circle.
yeah, so it feels really great. And it's, you know, the world has also changed a lot in this year, but I'm really glad that we can all be together still and celebrating all these great films.
Yes, indeed. You know, as we sit here a couple of days post-election day, that resonates deeply. Carol, your film is, of course, a personal story. So that's how you came by it. But in terms of the perspective and the impetus to turn the camera on your family, talk to us about that journey.
Yeah, I was actually in the midst of making a fiction film about how love assimilates through the generations. And I was asking my family about their experiences, which is where I encountered these stories that I've never heard before. And it hit me really hard because it brought me back to the time when I was a child and learned to condition myself to even now cry silently because of all the emotional suppression and the inability to communicate certain emotions within my family context. And I think it's something that a lot of immigrants and immigrant children can relate to because there are so many barriers that meet that point of communication and communal healing, which is culture, cultural values, language, and also generation. And I knew that, you know, at that point, I wanted to make a film about that, but not only just make a film about it, but also change. So how do you make a film about communicating and overcoming that without communicating? So that's where kind of the idea and the structure of my film came about.
Well, it's really powerful. And the impetus, it's so funny. I'm a child of immigrants. I'm a first generation West Indian American, Jamaica, West Indies. And your point about crying silently, that struck me unexpectedly. Because that is how you were told to be. I want to speak with you, Carol, and you, Taylor, about putting really vulnerable, naked emotion moments on camera, and what it's like to sit in a moment like that with your subjects, and how you get to, I mean, Carol, of course, this is your family, but this is still taboo isn't the word I'm looking for, but unfamiliar, uncomfortable ground for them to be in, you know, as it is, much less on camera. And then, you know, Taylor, of course, is speaking about such a deeply painful space. Share with us about the process of being able to shoot that comfortably, or I don't know if comfortably is the word, but being able to get there. Let's start with Taylor.
Yeah, it's actually something just happened this morning that's helped me contextualize that exact thing in a way I hadn't before. A friend exposed me to the work of Resma Menakem, who is a therapist.
I know his work.
Workshopper, incredible. And
Yeah.
I was listening to his podcast this morning, which talked about, the stark differences of how, like, as as a white bodied person, how I experience the basically like the suppressed reaction to horrific violence. If going back generationally to like have been a kid at a lynching and then to just sit there and just feel like, oh, this is sanctioned, I can't act in horror, and to hold that like guilt or just, that's like, that was, he's tapping into that as like what white people go through. But, the experience of building a trust and a beautiful friendship with Winfred, who, so generously shared his experience and how it's affected him, like opens me up to that even more. And, what I think the process of sitting there with that pain, with him crying and feeling, not only empathizing and understanding more deeply what the real effects on, this kind of violence on long-term psychology and human life can be. And then also facing what my own, like, not just like, oh, I can empathize with that pain, but like, what is the thing inside me that also needs to be examined and extracted from centuries of white supremacist behavior. And so, being there in the moment was tender. I mean, it was trust and it was space. And then reflecting on what that's done for me is opened me up to this whole world of investigation into, examining trauma within my culture. And, essentially, like, Shirley and I made this film, and we know it's a film that's very different for the Black community as it is for the white community. And it will elicit much different feelings. I think it holds different lessons. And it took us a long time, years actually, to edit that in a way that we felt, could be meaningful and powerful to both. But yeah, that's a little bit of something I went through.
Thank you. And Carol?
Yeah, although it was my family, there was a lot of relationship building that had to be done behind the scenes. And part of that was me revealing, my story that you don't hear on camera, which was when I was younger. This trauma still follows me to this day, but something silly as you might think, when my dog died, was a very hard time for me because I couldn't fully express my grief. I couldn't grieve in front of my family because
Right.
for someone who lived in Vietnam and lived through war, from a country where they treat dogs very differently and sometimes eat dogs, from parents who have seen people dead, what is that grief compared to theirs?
Right.
So for a long time that weighed heavily on me, and I didn't tell them about that because of my shame. So that was a part of the relationship building. And then also just having those conversations before we introduced the camera and the crew was so pivotal to understand what we can talk about on camera, how far I can push. And I think by the end of the film, at least I hope people realize that this isn't the end of something, but it's the start of something new. It's been over a year since we filmed it, and my family has made really slow but big steps. My sister, my mom, sometimes my dad, and I have started saying I love you to each other, which was something that was totally foreign before. You grow up in a Western country and you learn to display love in a certain way. On Valentine's Day, on Mother's Day, you write I love you on a card. But in your household, when you don't receive love that same way, you have to learn and kind of adjust yourself, which is hard for a kid. And so that was a huge step in that process, and we're still going and trying to be our best selves and communicating and listening every day, but it's just as hard as it was before.
Wow, that's a revelation. Thank you for sharing that. Allison and Mike, I want to speak to you both about access. Allison, artists are notoriously shy about sharing their process, and yet you brought us into some of the most, I imagine, intimate corners of the work. I'm curious. I mean, I know your track record and your brilliance as a filmmaker, I'm sure, helped with that. But in this particular case, I'm curious about that process and why you were able to see everything that we were shown in the film. And then Mike, you know, you are kind of listening over the shoulder, essentially, to some of the most, again, intimate and revealing and vulnerable conversations an adult woman or even a young woman will have. So please speak with us first about your decision to approach it that way, and you know, briefly about how you were able to achieve that access. Let's start with you, Allison.
Yeah, thanks for those kind words. I think Azuma was someone who was used to being, he's used to being filmed, and he's like allowed his work to be used. He collaborates a lot with fashion brands. You know, he'd had a few sort of branded content type things, you know, commercially oriented, shorts that had been done about him. So, you know, needless to say, when me and my team, Mark, all of us showed up, it took some getting used to, because he would sort of be like, well, what do you want me to do? You know, it was kind of like that. And it's like, no, what would you do? You know, what would you do today? And I think it was pretty strange for him, that as a process, because he's so meticulous and everything's always so beautiful. And I very intentionally came in, and the point of the film was not to one up, you know, his own work or anything like that, and really to be able to be there. Also pushing to go home with his family. He allowed us to go to his hometown, which was kind of important to the story. It's how he also met his collaborator Shinoki, who's the photographer, and meeting his mom. There are many other scenes that didn't make the film, but we, since we traveled around with him, going to Fukushima ended up being like a late addition, because as I learned about that he went there frequently, both in the wake of the tsunami and earthquake, and us kind of asking, like, so I think inviting the spontaneity was a really big thing. My husband, and also frequent collaborator, who's a producer also on the film, speaks Japanese fluently. This is the first film I've done where I know some Japanese, but definitely not enough to conduct the interviews myself, whereas other films I've always I've never had that language barrier. So he and I put in a lot of hard work, going out and eating and drinking with our subjects. And so yeah, I think you kind of figure out what's needed and communicate what you want, and then also kind of try to fade away. I think there was a lot of respect that they had for me, for Colin, for Mark, the cinematographer, and I think we all just came with that openness.
Brilliant. And Mike?
Yeah, when we started the film, we had this impression that we could actually make it without hearing the voices on the other end. So when you watch the film, it's all set within a small room where you're seeing the operator, who goes by Lisa, no matter who the person is. They always use the pseudonym Lisa, on the phone, asking questions of the caller, trying to assess their situation, and then they're entering information into a screen. And we had this impression early on that we could just show you could hear what the operators were saying, and then show the screen and show the numbers and understand what kind of like almost what small amounts of money that we're actually talking about, in terms of what is like a life-changing decision is ultimately hinged upon $25, $50 or something like that. But then it was just early on in the filming, I think at some point I just got like this little inkling of hearing a little bit of the conversation and hearing those voices. And that just changed everything. When you hear this sense of desperation, or you can just imagine the person's situation. One thing that we would hear a lot of is children in the background, and you hear the commotion in their lives, people calling from the street because they don't even necessarily have somewhere to be at that time. I think that just gives a whole other level of depth and depth to the story. So we worked with a lawyer to craft a statement that the operators would read, asking the women on the other end, would you be okay with us including your story without having any sort of details that would reveal anything about who you are within this? And I'd say like maybe 70% agreed, which I thought was really interesting. I thought that was that sort of like spoke, it was encouraging in a way to hear that. And then after we completed the film and we were working on the edit, we worked with a lawyer to actually like go through the film shot by shot and determine, making sure that there was no way in which you could find any information that would reveal who these women are. But to me, it's like when you hear their voices, it just changed everything, and suddenly it became a much more emotional experience. And it is so difficult to sit there and listen. I mean, and I think in the edit room, it was very challenging because you really want to include all of these calls. And it was very difficult to select it down to just a handful of calls. And there was a much longer cut that existed, which kind of went into all the different nuances in the ways in which this legislation really limits access. But we had to really make it succinct, I think, to give it the most impact.
And impactful it is. I just got the 5-minute warning, so I would love, since we don't have the audience here to give you any questions, if you could each share what you want the audience to take away from your film. We'll start with you, Alison.
I mean, the feeling I had was really seeing flowers in a whole new way, which can sound like a really simple thing, but to me, the world all around you, we can be more and more removed from the natural world, and flowers are something that we get to engage with, even in, in urban settings, not just rural settings. And thinking about, one of my favorite lines in the film, I guess, it actually reminded me of a line from Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, but they talk about how when the flowers go to the bottom of the ocean, and they're doing a lot of experiments on them. They kind of want to see how the flowers react bottom of the sea and in space. They talk about how they realized actually how incredibly strong the flowers were, how durable they were, how much they endured. They didn't just all collapse or come apart from the water pressure or the change, in pressure when it was in the stratosphere. And there's a line in Never Sorry, maybe, maybe to be strong, maybe to be fragile is to be strong. And I think that, that was something that came back to me when I was thinking about their takeaway from some of their artworks. So maybe it's that, maybe to be fragile is also to be strong.
I like that. That's pretty profound. Thank you. Going to go next to you, Mike.
I think, for me, what was such a revelation in working on this film was understanding, just seeing the direct impact of this kind of legislation, something like the Hyde Amendment, the way in which it really, has such a dramatic impact on people's lives, and to basically be able for an audience to see that direct correlation between what happens in the floors of, in DC versus how that plays out across the country. And I think just one other thing, I just feel that I became personally, when I was working on it, really almost like obsessed with the numbers and understanding how, what poverty or really looks like when you're talking about something like $25, $50, $15, something is making a difference between what I think of as almost like a life or death decision. And I don't think I ever really understood or appreciated that until that moment. And it was really, it was a real revelation for me.
Thank you. Taylor?
Yeah, well, just to speak on behalf of our team, really being myself and Shirley and Winfred, their goal really is their story, which is in the film, which is that, to really make progress forward especially around equality and understanding, like deeply looking back at our history is important. And art is a really powerful way to do that, that can be more inviting than a history book, which we know are often incorrect. And I am just so honored to have been a part of this, because it shows to me how many sources of light there are right now in our country, how many artists who are doing this work, how many people are inviting, educating, sharing, communicating, expressing, being vulnerable, guiding us across all cultural lines. And it's been a transformative experience for me to see that, to help uplift it, to share it, to seek more of it. And, you know, and then I guess the other thing I would want people to take away is that, you know, if you really sit with Winfred in this short film, and it doesn't take long to get to know him and to love him, you can see both his incredible joy and resilience, but also this real lasting impact of violence. And so everything that is going on in our country now, all of the deaths that have happened this year and last year and for the last hundreds of years is not going anywhere. And it just makes me feel like what's even happened this year is a wound that we need to hold space for each other well into the future. And then I'm just really grateful to my team for helping to create this.
Thank you so much. And Carol, last word to you.
I hope that my film was able to give audiences a glimpse inside of an immigrant family, and to show them the different assimilations and how that affects a whole diaspora. Assimilation of communication, love, grief, and the fact that grief never leaves you. A quote that I heard somewhere that really resonated with me once was that grief never leaves you. The only thing that changes is the way that you carry it in your life. And I think that is very true.
Wow. Thank you all for your beautiful work and your beautiful words here. It's a real pleasure to see you and speak with you, and I wish we could be doing this in person, but hopefully we will again soon. But for now, congratulations on your brilliant work, and to the audience joining us virtually, thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now.
Thank you.